It's just always desire to just like try something better. Can you go bigger? Can you see a new form? You're like, can I make that? And you know, just the whole process of clay is such a long process that, you know, it takes quite some time to get from the beginning lump of clay to the end. You've got to make it, you've got to trim it, you've got to bisque fire it, then you've got to glaze it, then you've got to fire it again. So there's so many processes along the way that you sort of get a little bit of input in, but you're sort of like, you know, wondering, will it all go how you want it to? Yeah. So, you know, you're putting a bit of yourself into a piece of pottery, you know, that goes out there. So you have to have control of the clay. So you have an idea in mind. Sometimes, you know, it evolves, and that process is great, that you just see something happening and you go with it. You sort of, you know, you get lost in the creative field of just going with it, especially when it comes to firing. So you've put a glaze on it, and glazing is never an exact science. So when you put the glaze on, you can't see what it will look like. It looks like a dusty, powdery covering. It could look white, and then you get it out of the kiln, it's actually a green glaze. You know, you would know it was green, but you can't tell what it will look like when you put it in. It's very much like a nervous Christmas day, lifting that kiln lid and seeing what's happened, and hopefully nothing's cracked, and hopefully you've got some nice blends of colours mixing the way you wanted it to. Yeah, it's an exciting process.
How I came about falling in love with ceramics was I'd always painted and drawn my whole life, and my auntie had a pottery studio, so I loved playing with the clay and going to visit her house and making little miniatures for my Smurf collection. That was my big thing. I would like make all sorts of furniture and things, and that's how I first got into it. I was about 5 years old, and I started making all sorts of things. And then I left it, and I still wanted to do my art, so I ended up doing a fine arts degree, thinking I'd major in painting. But I had a go at ceramics, and it just hooked me. I loved the chemistry, I loved the colors and the glaze technology, and that, you know, you could be a kind of like a witch and kind of create all these amazing different colors through just trial and error and playing with all the oxides and the elements that you'd find in nature, adding heat to it, and boom, you have these explosions of color. So yeah, I just found it elemental, and I liked the fact that you also lost control. At certain points, you put it in the kiln, and you leave it up to the kiln gods, and you hope that your vision is going to align with what's going to come out of the kiln. It often doesn't. Just when you think you've nailed something, and you'll push the boundaries and try and fire it too quickly and it'll blow up on you, or the glaze will run off and melt on the shelf, and people say, oh, why do you do it? It's so frustrating. And I go, I know, but when you get something beautiful and it really works, that's when it becomes just kind of spiritual in a way. For me, creating is a way of finding mindfulness, and I think with clay and the tactile nature of it, and the fact that you can move it and amend it and bash it and recreate it. It's such a tactile and moldable and malleable substance to work with. I can work in the middle of the night, and I can start working at 8 o'clock, and I look at my watch and it'll be 3 in the morning, and I go, crikey, I better go to sleep.
I studied painting in undergrad, and I learned glassblowing when I was there. So glassblowing, well, it's just so interesting. You know, you never can. You sort of get addicted to it. You know, you never can stop. The difference between painting and glassblowing is the immediacy, and it's just so physically demanding. You know, there's so many things you're doing at the same time. There's heat. You're just kind of constantly being inundated by things, and you're trying to work through it. Painting's quite relaxed, and you can come back to it. Glassblowing all has to happen immediately. You know, it's really short and fast. It's exciting.
The physicality of making, blowing, just working with hot glass that's the thing that's kept me intrigued and interested for nearly 30 years. It's just working with the hot material. It's kind of the ultimate, really. I mean, a lot of what we do is quite classic, hopefully timeless designs. And we've drawn inspiration from kind of mid-century design. We draw on what's happened in glass history in terms of decorative techniques and design trends, nature from, you know, surrounding environment, and that's pretty much it.
You need to understand postmodernism because that's what you're up against, and you're up against it far more than you know or think. And it's a much more well-developed and pervasive, pernicious, nihilistic, intellectually attractive doctrine than has yet come to public realization. It absolutely dominates the humanities and increasingly the social sciences in the universities. And if you want proof of that, you just go online and look at the websites, especially of disciplines like women's studies, which is pathological right to the core. It's anthropology, it's sociology, it's social work, and most of all, it's education. They're interested in the indoctrination of people as young as they can get their hands on. If you understand the doctrine, then you understand why things are progressing the way that they're progressing. And so I'm going to tell you a little bit about the doctrine. The first thing that you might want to note about postmodernism is that it doesn't have a shred of gratitude. And there's something pathologically wrong with a person who doesn't have any gratitude, especially when they live in what so far is the best of all possible worlds. And so if you're not grateful, you're driven by resentment, and resentment is about the worst emotion that you can possibly experience apart from arrogance. Resentment, arrogance, and deceit. There's an evil triad for you. The postmodernists completely reject the structure of Western civilization, and I mean completely. They don't believe in logic. They believe that logic is part of the process by which the patriarchal institutions of the West continue to dominate and to justify their dominance. They don't believe in dialogue. The root word of dialogue is logos again. They don't believe that people of goodwill can come to consensus through the exchange of ideas. So the reason they don't let people who they don't agree with speak on campus is because they don't agree with letting people speak. You see, it's not part of the ethos. They believe that since you don't have an individual identity, your fundamental identity is group fostered. And that means that you're basically an exemplar of your race, hence white privilege, or you're an exemplar of your gender or your sex or your ethnicity, or you're an exemplar of however you can be classified so that you are placed in the position of victim against the oppressor. If it's not the poor against the rich, it's the oppressed against the oppressor. We'll just redivide the subpopulations in ways that make our bloody philosophy continue in its movement forward. All there is a struggle for power. And if you're in the predator group, which means you're an oppressor, then you better look out. Don't apologize to these people. That's a big mistake. Apology, they read apology as an admission of guilt. Freedom expands your series of choices, and that makes you nervous and uncertain. But responsibility per se is what gives your life meaning, genuine meaning in the face of suffering. And young people they're starving for that. I've been teaching young people for 30 years, and mostly what I've been teaching them about is responsibility. It's like you're heirs to a great tradition. It's not perfect, obviously, but comparatively, there's nothing else like it that's ever been produced.
Today we'll focus on postmodernism, which will empower you to create the brave new world. As emerging leaders from university, you will be constructing social justice for citizens of the global society. It will be your life's work. French philosophers Michel Foucault, Jean-Francois Lyotard, and American Richard Rorty were all previously communists and collectivists. But observed by the 1960s that communism was not achieving its goal in overthrowing capitalism and the existing social order. Derrida realized that no truth is known. We must therefore deconstruct our conditioning and beliefs to set the foundation for a new model of existence without sexism, privilege, racism, and fascism. This will result in blotting out injustice and exploitation. This powerful process of shaping a new world order will inspire you to commit to teach communities to accept differences, foster diversity, and break prejudice.
Your question is an example of using language to gain control of the issue. Of course, John Stuart Mill argued that students must learn not only the best answers, but also their contenders. Not only that, they'll know the best arguments for the contender positions and how to respond to them. Well, I agree with Professor Stanley Fish, who said, "That's the silliest thing I've ever heard. You don't want to build up your opponent's arguments, you want to squelch them."
They learnt that reason, i.e. science and language, is used as a way of subjugating the proletariat by the elite in asserting and maintaining political and economic power. Meta-narratives, or the big stories, as presented by religion and science, were a tool to subjugate the working class into accepting the status quo. This new reality will require you to learn different narratives and explanations in order to overthrow the status quo. Skepticism will throw doubt on the old world order. Subjectivity will demonstrate your personal experience as truth. Relativity will show everything as equally important. Reason will depend upon the understanding you select. The enhancement of language will make meanings more relevant. Racism can only be practiced by the privileged white race, not the other way around. Sexism against the patriarchal gender is impossible by definition. As students, you will acquire these intellectual and emotional tools to destroy barriers to opportunity for change, to advance the rights of minorities, and to enjoy greater freedom of gender fluidity.
We don't oppose free speech. In fact, we encourage education along the lines of our ideology. We simply oppose hate speech. Any speakers cancelled here weren't welcomed by leftist students. The university has a responsibility to take a stand against this type of racist bigotry. By allowing cancelled speakers the opportunity to have a platform here, the administration's effectively handing them a megaphone to promote the same old hateful ideology.
Oppressive white males will be challenged to relinquish power and become tolerant of alternative behaviour. Phallocentrism, meaning male dominance, will become limited as masculinity is defined into a more caring society where children can be reared into different family structures. Rigid ideologies will collapse into fluid interaction between genders. Norms will change and become exciting.
It is impossible in fact unnecessary, to keep political bias out of the classroom. It's the job of the faculty to decide which critical, relevant and commanding viewpoints to concentrate on in the classroom. Why should I teach a point of view I don't agree with? I should teach what's useful to the student. I don't know that I have a responsibility to teach somebody's view that's contemptible or ignorant.
Exploitation for profit will be less meaningful as capitalism implodes and the proletariat rebel as profit by Marx. Work will be redefined. Like me and my colleagues, you will also not allow religion and science to restrict the human experience. Your research project and tutorials will be to explore your political identity. Are you who you think you are? Criticism of PC or woke action is totally misplaced. Your feelings are as valid a way of knowing as any other. Make sure you demand that this be a safe space from the unenlightened. You too can accept the responsibility for protesting and cancelling objectors who restrain our progress towards awakening culture.
Well, I hope to radicalise students by my courses and trust that other faculty share the same aim for ruthless criticism of all that exists without fear of the results arrived at. I concur with Marx when he says the philosophers have only interpreted the world in various ways. The point is to change it.
Oh.